Hi, everybody. I'm George Siegel. Welcome to the Tell Us How to Make It Better podcast. I came across a guy a few weeks ago that is doing something that I thought was pretty interesting. He's putting together communities in a program called Operation Self-Reliance, where people are living or will be living off the grid. Jesse Fisher says he's helping people achieve ultimate preparedness by setting them up to produce all their own life-sustaining food, water, and power, surrounded by others doing the same thing. Now, while this may seem like something that isn't right for everyone, the concept of being self-sufficient and not relying on all the existing services that we're stuck depending on is pretty interesting. I'm George Siegel, and this is the Tell Us How to Make It Better podcast. Your home is probably your biggest investment, and every week we show you warning signs and solutions to help you protect it. Tell Us How to Make It Better is partnering with the Readiness Lab, the home for podcasts, webinars, and training in the field of emergency and disaster services. Jesse, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome, George. Appreciate the opportunity.
Now, when I came across your information, I'm fascinated by it because I'm real big on resilience and having people build homes the right way. And you're kind of taking it to an even bigger step by taking people off the grid so they're not dependent on all the services that tend to fall apart in disasters. So tell me about what you have going on.
Well, actually, this is a project called Operation Self-Reliance, and what we're actually planning to do and doing is build 5 off-grid self-sustaining communities along the Rocky Mountains. So our first one's in Utah. The second one, we're making an offer right now on some land in Arizona for our second location. So the idea is that you join the co-op. It's very similar to a housing co-op like in New York City, where 75% of the people who own an apartment own it through a co-op. So you pay for your share and the apartment comes with. If you want to sell your apartment, you sell your share in the co-op. So you're a co-owner of the entire building. We're doing the exact same thing, but with farmland. And the idea is that you would build your own passive solar home, greenhouse, septic system, solar, water well, and water distribution system, and greenhouse, and start producing your own food and working with your neighbors. So
do you really have to be into doing all that stuff to be in the community? Like if I said, hey, I want a retirement home, that might not be for me, or is it for somebody?
No, actually that would work. In fact, we have 10 shareholders in the Utah location who have purchased 2 shares. So they're going to use one to live on themselves and the other one for like a family retreat or Airbnb or something as an income producing property. We're organized under Utah's agricultural co-op law, Title III of the Utah Code. And so the land has to be agriculturally productive. You don't have to do all the work. You can have your neighbor, some guy down the street who needs more property. Maybe he wants, to have some extra goats or something. And somebody has to work the land. So it's either you or a neighbor or whoever. But, the bar is quite low. So the Utah law says you have to produce in a census year. So that'd be 2030 is the next one, $1,000 worth of agricultural products or services. That wouldn't be very hard at all, especially with the inflation going up. By 2030, maybe one apple tree would do it. I don't know.
I was gonna say, get one cow. That might might push it across. Now, what I find really interesting about that is, how resilient do you build these homes? I know every place in the country has its own potential disaster. So when you're in the Rockies, you're probably dealing with potential for tornadoes, snow, ice, things like that. What thought goes into the structures? Do people come out and build their own home? Is it just part of the master plan where you have certain houses they can build there? How does that work?
Actually, the vast majority of the restrictions come from government. The co-op is like, build something that will keep you from freezing in the winter and cooking in the summer. And so it's the county it's the state health department that requires a septic system. It's the county that requires it to be certain size, and it has to pass the International Residential Building Code. As long as you can get your architect or your engineer to stamp your plans with his little red stamp that says you qualify under the International Residential Code, you could build your house out of Legos. We're not an HOA, and in fact, most of us are allergic to HOAs, so uh, we don't really impose any kind of standard. It's just we want you to, we prefer living neighbors, so we want you to build the house in a way that you'll survive the winter if your power source goes out. So that's
So,
passive solar. And
but so considering it's off the grid, do you think it's important to at least establish some type of standard? Because anybody could really build anything. Like I didn't see the word resilience anywhere in your description. I like all the other stuff because that's the things that everybody falls apart on. There's a community down here that's inland from Naples and Sanibel Island called Babcock Ranch. I don't know if you read anything about them
I
after
haven't heard of
Hurricane
that.
Ian last year, but they built with a lot of off the grid systems of power and water and things. So when a big storm hit, they weren't going to be victimized like everybody else. And they
Mm,
had almost no damage from the storm, but they put the preparedness angle into what they were building. Are you
mm.
guys, I mean, I think that's not being encouraged, or it's being encouraged, but it's not being insisted upon.
Yeah, we're not into creating more laws and rules that can't be enforced. Um, no, our focus is on your system itself as being resilient. So, for example, if you're dependent on Costco for your food, you're that's it's not very resilient. We've seen in COVID how easily the shelves can be emptied. And if you're producing all your own food, all your own water, all your own power, you're not at risk if there's a disaster. For example, the Utah State Water Rights Division, I think they were fishing for a bribe. Anyway, they were stonewalling us for a year, wouldn't allow us to drill any wells. And finally, we hired an attorney, and magically they're cooperative. So, being independent, they wanted us to have a centralized water system. And it's like, well, we're out in the middle of the desert. If if the pump goes out on this centralized water system, we've got 250 households that don't have water. That's not very resilient. If we What we're doing is trying to build a community out of building blocks. Each brick is completely independent. So if your neighbor's well goes down, you can run a hose over to his house and help him out until he can fix his well. But if we have a centralized system and it goes down, everybody's screwed.
What kind of reaction are you getting from people? I remember an episode of The Twilight Zone where this one family had a bomb shelter, but nobody else did. There's the threat of a nuclear war, and everybody
Right.
stormed their bomb shelter.
I think I saw that one. I was a very young little kid when I saw that
Yeah.
one.
So do you think
I
about
don't.
that? I mean, the resilient community, or not the resilient community, the bunkered community, the off-grid people, a lot of people go, ah, gosh, those guys are crazy until something goes wrong. And all of a
Right.
sudden you're the smartest guys in the world. What kind of
Right.
thought?
Well, our thinking on that is that we're literally 80 miles from a metro area, and between us and them, it's desert. So, it'll take about a week if things fall apart. It'll take about a week for people to realize we got to get out of Dodge. By then, they've used up most of their gasoline driving around looking for food and water. Or A, do they even know we're out there? And B, do they know we're producing food? So we're thinking that 80 miles of desert isn't going to be very enticing. Marauders will want to stay where the people are, where the victims are. And
Now,
so we're
is there any kind of commute that anybody going to work outside the community, or the people that are going to live here, pretty much their life is there, and maybe they load up the wagon and the horses and go into town, but they're really not. It's not a daily thing.
nobody, there's only one horse on the
Okay.
ranch so far, one tame horse. We have wild horses just north of us. Um, that's hilarious. Let's see. As far as I know, everybody doesn't report to me, so everybody's doing their own thing basically. But I do know there are at least two people who commute. One commutes to Delta, which is 50 miles away, and the other commutes to Dugway, which is 30 something miles away. But the rest of them either work online or they're retired or they work there at Riverbed Ranch, helping build the neighbors' homes and stuff.
Now, when you choose a community to do something like this, does it have to be an area that's out away from everything in an open space? Could something like that work closer to where more people live, or then you'd have to deal with county and city regulations and it just gets
Well,
too bogged down?
every square inch of land in the United States is inside a county, as far as I
Sure.
know.
Just in terms of a
Yeah,
bigger city.
we're trying to avoid bigger cities being too close. The property in Arizona is like 15, 18 miles from the closest community, which is a fairly small town. So I think we'll be okay there. We really just want to be a producer. You know, you hear people talking about how consumers this and consumers that, and it's like I personally take offense at that label. I consider myself a producer. So um, the concept is for this community to be the largest producer of agricultural products in whatever region it is.
How do you survive while you're getting it up and running? So you're gonna. I'm moving out there. I have my house. I've built it, but the neighborhood's kind of playing catch up, and there's not a whole variety of things to buy so I can live on. What's that process like?
Well, yeah, that's been really interesting. We've never built towns before. So, in fact, we don't know anybody who's built towns before. So, this is a learning process for us as well. And what we're learning is it's a little slow at first because the only people who can move out are people who work online or who are retired. And so then the people who can come are those who can do work for those people who are there. So it's a slow growth of the local economy. So we started this 3 years ago at Riverbed Ranch when we found that property, and there's some families that have been there for that amount of time, working online or well, one of them goes off every couple of weeks and works on oil wells, but so it's a slow growth process. We're hoping that we can speed that up by being a little closer to a community in Arizona. We'll see. We're learning as we go, George. We haven't got all the answers.
Sure, I would imagine it would be very very challenging. It makes you think what the Pilgrims had to deal with and all the people that were the pioneers that moved across the country. I don't think I would have survived 5 minutes with that. I probably would have been the third or fourth wave. Said, call me once you guys have developed a community. So, what are people doing then that are out there? So they have to drive 80 miles to the grocery store. Maybe they go every now and then. Maybe does Amazon deliver out
Well,
there?
actually, I talked to the manager of the UPS in the local metro area, Orem, Utah, and he says I've got packages piled up for you guys, and I don't know who to give them to distribute to them anyway. So we worked it out that they would come out twice a week. I think in the winter they came out once a week. And then FedEx has this beefy truck that they send out because we're 30 miles on rock roads
Wow.
from anywhere. So it's most people will, they'll go into town and either 80 miles to Costco or 50 miles to a regular grocery store in Delta, Utah, and pick up supplies that they need. Couple of families. In fact, the one family that's been there almost the longest, they're producing vegetables that they're selling locally to the other residents of Riverbed Ranch. They have three greenhouses, I believe, and they produced lettuce and vegetables that they sold locally all summer long.
But you're not
And
likely to
even
get
into the
Uber
winter.
Eats to come out there and
No,
deliver you
no,
a
probably
meal.
not. You
So
pretty much need you pretty much need a four-wheel drive truck if you don't want to ever get stuck. We've had a
Hey, that
really, really wet winter, very, very unusually wet winter and spring. In fact, there's flooding in Utah right now.
that's where
But
that drone delivery is kind of an interesting concept when you see that it's being done that way. Because for
yeah,
communities like yours, I mean, I think you'd have to be somewhat creative to come up with that. So if I decided today, okay, I want to take my family off the grid and we're moving to Utah, what am I looking at to get some land out there? And the cost would be up, I guess, up to me to put whatever house I want there, but to just get the
right.
basic things going, what's involved with that?
Yeah, we've got some ballpark figures. So as I mentioned, this is a cooperative. So your share in the co-op costs 35,000, and that gets you whichever 2 to 2.4 acre lot you pick. There's still 120 of them left, and it comes with 2.5 acre feet of water shares. If you're in the Western US, you know how crucially important water shares are, and a prepaid well permit. So, and then we estimate to put in your infrastructure. We used to recommend people build their house first so they can live there and then work on everything else. Now we're after having had experience, we're saying no, do your infrastructure first. Put in the very first thing, put in your septic system.
Hmm.
So you could live in an RV on your lot if you had to, or had an RV. Put in your septic system, your solar system, your water well. We've got a well driller from a local, not too distant town who basically camps out at Riverbed Ranch and drills wells all day, every day. Um, Septic, solar, a greenhouse, so you can get your food producing going right away. And all of that infrastructure, including the share, runs about $100,000. So this isn't one of those hippie commune communities that you can just show up and start helping. You've got to have some assets.
Sure. Now, it's tough
Which,
enough though when I'm building something in a large city, it's tough enough to find good craftsmen or people to work that that do a good job. Now you're 80 miles away from, I guess, civilization. How tough is it if you have a crew coming out there to build something for you? What's that process like? I would think they have to go back and forth every day. Is there how, I mean,
well,
I can't even
yeah,
fathom how they
the
would do that.
the company that did the stucco on my house, they they had done work for my neighbor out at Riverbed Ranch, and so I said, "Hey, come help me." Well, the neighbor had a big RV on his lot, and the crew just stayed in the RV during the week, and then went home on weekends. When I had them work on my house doing stucco, one of the crew members was female, and I guess she wasn't very comfortable living in the RV with the other men on the crew. So so they started coming out on weekends, which drug it out. So that was a challenge. But there are about 5 or 6 people who moved to Riverbed Ranch and said, "Hey, here are my skills. If you need my help, let me know." And those guys are busy constantly. So there's a contractor. There's a handyman who's a retired dentist. He hated being a dentist, so he became a handyman. He's he did all the walls in my house, and he's doing my plumbing, and he's going to help me with laying the floor tiles. So there are people available. It is a challenge. It's much more challenging than in a big city, obviously, because we are out in the middle of nowhere. I was just going to say, back to the costs involved.
Sure.
Passive solar home, bare bones minimum. The county requires it to be at least 600 square feet, which is like a 1 bedroom. A lot of us have the strategy of building the smallest thing we can stand first, then get your permit to move in. Can't ever remember what that's called. And then immediately apply to remodel your house and make it bigger so that you can be there on site. So my house, my starter home, my off-grid starter home is 864 square feet, 2 bedroom, 1.5 bath. So my plan is to add on another 3 rooms that I can use for an office and storage and food processing or whatever else we want to do on our property.
How's it built? So is it a wood frame? Is it shingle roof? I
Mine
mean, what
is,
do you put out there?
yeah, there are all sorts of different types of homes being built out there. Mine, it simply built,
Okay.
SIMPLYBILT.com. It's the owner of a concrete company here locally, for about 10 years was toying with this idea of building a kit that any family could work together and raise this house. And what it is of 16-inch centers of wood, it's 4-foot centers of steel beams. And in the space in between, it's 9 inches of EPS foam, which is massively insulated. Once you put an outside and sheetrock on the inside, you can literally heat your house with less than a hair dryer in the
Hmm.
middle of the winter. In fact, my home with all the windows on the south side, it gets up to 70 degrees with no heat. It's just the sun coming in the windows and the insulated value. Now, we do have some purists in the group who freak out because a couple of us built our homes out of styrofoam. And I get that. It's just that it was very fast. It went up in a very short amount of time. If you have, a crew of 4 or 5 people, you can put up one of these shells in a week. Other people are using compressed earth block, regular stick frame houses, but with quite a bit bigger. So 2x10s, so that there's gobs of room for insulation. And
And do they
then
pour
there's
foundations for these?
yeah, oh yeah, we have our own concrete plant. It's so
Oh, wow.
cool. Instead
It
of
is.
waiting a month and paying twice as much for concrete from Salt Lake or wherever else, we can order concrete for the next day. Yeah, we encourage everybody to have their own home-based business. And he decided, being a contractor, he said, well, gosh, we need concrete. So he set up a rock quarry and a concrete plant on a portion of the co-op property. We have an additional 500 acres for whatever projects our shareholders want to do together or individually. And there was a corner of the property that had a whole bunch of rock. So he set up this huge rock quarry thing and produces all the concrete we need. Get it delivered the next day. It's so cool.
Awesome. So when do you hope to move into your house?
Well, that's a good question. My wife needs to work one more year. She works for the local school district, and before she can get her pension. So, well, the house will be done long before we get to move into it. Right now, I've got the roof, the walls, the walls aren't sheetrocked. I'm getting ready for the 4-way inspection. As soon as the plumbing is finished, we can get the inspector in there and start sheetrocking it.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's tough enough to get an inspector here in the city when you need one to come out. Good luck getting them to drive 80
Well, we're in
miles.
a small county. This county is, by the time our community fills out completely with all the possible residents, third or fourth largest town in the county. And so it's not a very highly populated county. In the western half of Utah, the counties are really long and narrow. And so the population is all on the end by I-15 highway. We're in the middle of that county, literally in the middle of nowhere. But the inspectors, they'll come out quite frequently. They prefer to have several projects to do all at once, after making that trip.
Sure. You getting a
But
lot of Californians? Any celebrities moving out there?
we did have a professional, what was he? Baseball player? Yeah, a professional baseball player was looking at it, but he didn't bite. We do have residents from California, a lot. We have residents from Oregon, Washington, California, Nevada, Colorado, Arizona, and then the rest probably from Utah.
So give me your dream scenario, long-term goal with this. What would you like to see happen?
Well, actually, I don't know if you've noticed, but America seems to be on the decline.
Yeah, I
That
kind of noticed that. Yeah.
registered.
Yeah.
So, kind of what we're doing is, I don't know, you could call them cities of refuge if you wanted to, I suppose. So these 5 communities that we're planning on building, all producing much more food than they'll need. So we'll be exporting gobs of food. And let's say there's a national crisis of some sort. Maybe the terrorists finally figure out how to take out our power grid. And I think it tends to be the farmers, the people who are producing food, who get through those kinds of transitions the best.
I look forward to following your progress with this, and wish you success with it. I'm for anything where somebody's trying something innovative to make things better, and it certainly seems like that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and we're learning a lot in the process.
Thank you for joining me today on the Tell Us How to Make It Better podcast. All Jesse's contact information is in the show notes. My information is there as well. I hope you'll become a subscriber of the podcast, and I also have a contact form there. So if you have a story of building or remodeling or being a victim of a major disaster, let me hear about it. We can feature you on an upcoming episode. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.